The crowd around the gorilla enclosure gasped, stumbling back in shock, as the young boy's scream echoed through the zoo. A small figure, no more than 12 years old, was clinging to the bars inside the cage, his wide eyes staring at the two enormous gorillas, who were equally startled by his presence. The boy's heart hammered in his chest, his gaze darting between the animals and the sneering face of the zookeeper, Mr. Grimes, who had just locked the door behind him. "Let's see how brave you are now," Grimes muttered under his breath, barely audible but loud enough for the boy to catch. The zookeeper's twisted grin made the boy feel colder than the shadow of the beasts that loomed over him. Mr. Grimes watched with cruel satisfaction, not knowing that the very zoo he worked for belonged to the boy's father, who had trusted him with the care of all its animals and guests. The boy felt tears prickling at his eyes, but he held them back, remembering his father's words about staying calm in moments of danger. And although fear surged through him, he couldn't look away from Mr. Grimes, who had made his hatred clear since the day he'd seen him enter the zoo. As the boy's heart pounded louder, he noticed the gorillas shifting closer. He could sense the unease in the animals too, as if they understood they were being drawn into something they didn't want any part of. And then with a click, he heard the sound of the cage door locking, trapping him inside. His breath caught in his throat as he realized he was truly stuck, alone with the massive, unpredictable animals. The crowd grew silent, some snapping photos in shock, others murmuring and wondering if what they were seeing was part of some strange show. But in that moment, the boy wasn't thinking about the crowd or even the gorillas. He was thinking of his father. Would he even know what had happened? Would anyone come in time? He didn't have long to wait to find out. Earlier that day, the morning had started just like any other, with the sun shining brightly over the sprawling zoo. Families were lined up outside the gates, excited to explore. The boy, Jaden, was thrilled to be spending the day at his dad's zoo, a place he'd grown to love and knew by heart. Jaden's father, Mr. Thompson, had built the zoo from the ground up. It was a place where animals thrived and families came together to learn about wildlife. Jaden knew almost all the animals by name, and he even had a few favorites, like Bongo the elephant and Tiny the tiger, who wasn't tiny at all. Jaden's dad always said he'd one day teach Jaden everything about running the zoo, but for now, he was content to explore on his own. Jaden's father had asked Mr. Grimes, one of the zookeepers, to show him around the more restricted parts of the zoo. But something about Mr. Grimes always made Jaden uneasy. Mr. Grimes was tall and thin with sharp features and a gaze that seemed to judge everyone and everything he looked at. He was known for being strict, but Jaden sensed something else, something darker. As Jaden trailed along, Mr. Grimes would make the occasional mean comment masked as humor. He called Jaden a soft city kid, and stared at the way Jaden spoke about the animals with a gentle respect. Whenever Jaden tried to ask questions about the gorillas or the lions, Mr. Grimes would snort and say, "A boy like you wouldn't understand." Jaden tried not to let it bother him. He knew his father would tell him to ignore people like Grimes. After all, his dad had hired Grimes because he was good with animals, but he had warned Jaden to keep his distance. But today, something felt different. There was an anger simmering in Mr. Grimes' eyes, a bitterness that seemed even more intense than usual. Jaden noticed it the most when they reached the gorilla enclosure, where Grimes stopped and leaned against the railing. "Ever been close to these beasts?" Grimes asked, his voice low and cold. Jaden shook his head. He admired the gorillas from afar, but knew they were powerful animals. He wasn't foolish enough to get too close. But before Jaden could move away, Grimes grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a side door near the back of the enclosure. "Come on then," Grimes said. "Time for a real experience." Jaden hesitated. "My dad wouldn't want me going in there without him." "Oh, your dad wouldn't mind," Grimes sneered, his grip tightening. "Trust me." Jaden tried to pull back, but Grimes was stronger. He yanked the door open, practically shoving Jaden inside the cage. Jaden stumbled, falling to his knees as the door slammed shut behind him. The sound of the lock clicking sent a chill down his spine. Jaden scrambled to his feet, facing the two gorillas who were now watching him with wary eyes. The animals shifted uneasily, sensing the tension in the air. Jaden took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. His heart pounded as he saw Mr. Grimes on the other side of the bars, a cruel smirk playing across his face. "This is what happens when you think you're better than everyone else," Grimes muttered, his eyes gleaming with malice. Jaden felt a rush of fear and anger. He didn't understand why Grimes was doing this. What had he done to deserve it? The crowd had begun to gather, murmuring in confusion as they saw Jaden inside the cage. Some were laughing, thinking it was a stunt, while others were growing uneasy, sensing something was wrong. Jaden's father had taught him that animals could feel emotions too, and as he looked at the gorillas, he could see they were just as unsettled as he was. The largest one, a male with a silver streak down his back, took a step forward, sniffing the air cautiously. Jaden held his breath, trying to remain calm, just like his father had taught him. But fear clawed at him from the inside, threatening to take over. Jaden took a deep breath, remembering his father's advice to be calm and think clearly in the face of fear. But his mind was racing with questions. What did Mr. Grimes have against him? Why would he do something so dangerous? Jaden clenched his fists, anger bubbling up alongside his fear. He wanted to shout, to demand why he was being treated this way, but he knew it wouldn't help. Not with Grimes, who seemed to enjoy watching him squirm. The gorillas were still watching him too, their expressions almost curious as they'd picked up on the distress, radiating from both Jaden and the crowd. The bigger gorilla, whom Jaden recognized as Bosco, tilted his head, observing him. Jaden had seen Bosco before from outside the bars and always thought of him as a gentle giant. But being inside with him now was entirely different. Bosco's sheer size was intimidating, and Jaden knew enough to respect his strength. Mr. Grimes took a few steps back from the cage, glancing around at the crowd as if daring someone to question what was happening. His smirk hadn't faded, but Jaden noticed a flicker of nervousness in his eyes when he spotted a zoo security guard approaching. The guard frowned, looking from Jaden to Grimes. "Is this part of some show?" the guard asked, suspicion in his voice. "Oh, just giving the boy a close-up view of the gorillas," Grimes replied, trying to sound casual, though there was a mocking tone underneath. "After all, it's his daddy's zoo, isn't it? Shouldn't he get to see the animals up close?" Jaden's heart skipped a beat as he looked at the guard, silently pleading for him to see through Grimes' lie. But the guard looked uncertain, glancing between Grimes, the cage, and the crowd. He didn't know the boy's father owned the zoo, and he seemed hesitant to interfere without more information. Grimes quickly shifted his attention back to Jaden. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to boss people around." "Huh." Jaden felt his face flush with anger. He had never tried to boss anyone around, least of all someone like Grimes. He could feel the sting of unfairness burning in his chest. He wasn't sure what Grimes was talking about, but he knew there was something wrong with the way the zookeeper looked at him, something that had always made him feel unwelcome. In the cage, Bosco took another step forward, making a low, rumbling noise that seemed to vibrate the air. Jaden felt a surge of fear, but he forced himself to stay still, meeting the gorilla's gaze with as much calm as he could manage. He'd always believed that animals could sense fear, and he didn't want to give Bosco any reason to feel threatened. Just then, Jaden's eyes widened as he saw a familiar figure pushing through the crowd. It was his father, Mr. Thompson, his face tight with worry as he scanned the enclosure. When he spotted Jaden inside the cage, his eyes blazed with fury, his mouth opening in a silent shout of shock. Mr. Thompson's presence gave Jaden a glimmer of hope. He knew his father wouldn't let him stay in this cage for 1 second longer than necessary. Jaden watched as his father marched toward Mr. Grimes, his steps quick and furious. "What do you think you're doing?" Mr. Thompson's voice was a mix of disbelief and rage. "How dare you put my son in there?" Grimes' smirk faded as he tried to stammer out a response, his confidence visibly crumbling under Mr. Thompson's glare. "I was just thought the kid wanted to get a closer look," Grimes stuttered, his bravado evaporating. "You know, give him a little adventure." "A little adventure?" Mr. Thompson's voice was icy. "My son isn't a plaything, and neither are these animals. I hired you to protect and care for them, not to use them in some twisted game." Jaden could see that his father's anger was only growing, and for the first time, he noticed Grimes beginning to look scared. The tables were turning, and Jaden's heart swelled with relief, but also with pride in his father, who was standing up for him with a strength that felt reassuring and solid. But Grimes, desperate and cornered, took a step back, muttering, "You people think you own everything, don't you? Just because you have money, you think you're in charge." Mr. Thompson's eyes narrowed, and he motioned to the security guard, who quickly stepped forward. "Get him out of my sight," he ordered. "I'll be dealing with him soon enough." Grimes was escorted away, but not before casting one last hateful look at Jaden, a look that seemed to say, "This isn't over." Jaden shivered, feeling the weight of Grimes' anger even as the crowd began to disperse. As his father finally unlocked the cage and reached out to pull him to safety, Jaden stumbled forward, clutching his dad tightly. He was safe now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Grimes' twisted grudge was far from finished. Jaden clung to his father's arm as they walked back toward the main office. The zoo felt different now. He could still feel Mr. Grimes' cold gaze lingering on him, even though the zookeeper was nowhere in sight. It was as if Grimes' hatred had left a shadow behind, one that Jaden couldn't shake. "Are you all right, Jaden?" Mr. Thompson asked, looking down at him with concern. He gave Jaden's shoulder a comforting squeeze, his eyes softening. Jaden nodded, but his heart was still pounding. "Yeah, I think so. But Dad, why does he hate me?" Mr. Thompson sighed, guiding Jaden into the quiet of his office. He closed the door behind them and took a seat, pulling Jaden close. "Sometimes people have ugly thoughts inside them, son. They're unfair, and don't make sense," Mr. Thompson said, his voice steady but serious. "Grimes has worked here for a while, but I had no idea his feelings were this strong, or that he'd go as far as he did today." Jaden thought about the way Grimes had sneered at him, how he had locked him in the cage with such malice. "Dad, he looked at me like he wanted to hurt me." Mr. Thompson's jaw tightened. "I know, Jaden. I saw it too. And I promise I'll make sure he never gets the chance to do anything like that again." There was a knock at the door, interrupting them. The head zookeeper, Miss Kim, entered, her expression tense. "Mr. Thompson, I heard about what happened. I wanted to make sure everything was okay," she said, glancing at Jaden with a look of sympathy. Mr. Thompson nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "Jaden's all right, but this incident has made it clear that Grimes isn't a good fit here. We'll be letting him go." Miss Kim's face lit up in relief. "I think that's for the best. There have been complaints about him before, but nothing like this. It's just unsettling." Jaden listened as his father and Miss Kim discussed the situation, but his mind drifted back to Grimes. He couldn't forget the man's final look, that silent promise of revenge. Jaden shivered, wishing he could forget the entire experience. The days that followed were calm, but an uneasy tension hung in the air. Jaden did his best to push thoughts of Mr. Grimes away, focusing instead on his summer routine at the zoo. He spent time learning about the animals, shadowing zookeepers he trusted, and playing with his friends who came to visit. One afternoon, Jaden was helping Miss Kim feed the lemurs when he noticed her phone buzzing nonstop. She glanced at the screen, her face suddenly growing pale. "Everything okay?" Jaden asked, handing her another banana for the lemurs. Miss Kim forced a small smile. "It's just strange. Mr. Grimes has been making a bit of a fuss since he left. It seems he's been talking to some reporters." Jaden's heart skipped a beat. "What? About what happened in the gorilla cage?" Miss Kim nodded, looking uneasy. "Not just that. He's making up stories, saying we mistreat the animals, that the zoo isn't safe for visitors. None of it is true, but if people believe him." She trailed off, biting her lip. Jaden felt his stomach twist. This was Grimes' revenge. He was trying to ruin the zoo's reputation, and he didn't care how many lies he had to tell to do it. He knew how much his father had put into the zoo, how much he loved it and cared for the animals. Seeing someone trying to tear it all down felt like another attack. "We'll be fine," Miss Kim said, as if reading his mind. "Your dad is working on it. The truth will come out eventually." But as Jaden walked through the zoo later that day, he couldn't ignore the whispers he heard. A few visitors were talking about the news stories, wondering aloud if it was true. Some even left early, looking worried. The zoo was quieter than usual for the next few days. Jaden's father was constantly on the phone, dealing with reporters and lawyers, trying to fight back against Grimes' lies. Jaden could see the exhaustion in his father's eyes, but every time he tried to talk to him about it, Mr. Thompson would smile and tell him not to worry. One evening, after the zoo had closed and the staff had gone home, Jaden found himself wandering the pathways alone, thinking. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the enclosures, and the sounds of animals settling down for the night filled the air. As he walked past the gorilla enclosure, he felt a strange sense of peace, remembering how Bosco had watched him calmly, even though he had been scared. He approached the cage, hoping to catch a glimpse of the gentle giant before it got too dark. But as he drew closer, he noticed something strange. The cage door, the very door Grimes had locked him behind, was slightly ajar. Jaden's heart skipped a beat. All the enclosures were supposed to be securely locked, especially after what had happened. He looked around, wondering if any of the night staff were nearby. He spotted a flashlight beam in the distance and started to wave, but stopped when he realized the person holding the flashlight was none other than Mr. Grimes. Jaden froze, his blood running cold. Grimes wasn't supposed to be here. He had been fired. Yet here he was, creeping around the zoo after hours with a strange, determined look on his face. Jaden ducked behind a tree, watching as Grimes approached the gorilla cage, muttering to himself. Jaden's heart pounded as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Why was Grimes here, and why was the cage open? Then, to Jaden's horror, he watched as Grimes reached into his backpack, pulling out a large metal object that glinted in the dim light. Grimes leaned over the cage, reaching inside as if he was planning to set something up or break something down. Jaden's mind raced. He had to do something, but he was just one kid against a grown man. And Grimes looked angrier than he had ever seen him before, his face twisted with a strange, determined rage. In that moment, Jaden knew he had to act fast. Grimes was here to cause trouble, and if he succeeded, the zoo could be in danger, along with all the animals inside. Taking a deep breath, Jaden slowly backed away, careful not to make a sound. He needed to get help, but he couldn't leave without making sure that Grimes couldn't harm the animals or escape unnoticed. He decided he would run to the main office, where he knew the emergency phone was. His dad had always told him to use it only in serious situations, but this certainly counted. As he began to make his way down the darkened path, he kept glancing back, watching Grimes' shadow moving around the gorilla enclosure. Suddenly, a twig snapped beneath his foot, the sound echoing through the quiet zoo. Grimes' head whipped around, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the area. Jaden ducked, heart pounding, hoping he hadn't been seen. But it was too late. Grimes' flashlight swung in his direction, illuminating the area around him. Well, Grimes sneered, stepping forward. What's a little rat like you doing out here at night? Jaden's breath caught, his mind racing for a way out as Grimes approached, his steps slow and threatening. And as Grimes loomed closer, Jaden realized with a sinking feeling that he was trapped once again. Jaden's pulse thundered in his ears as he took a shaky step back, his eyes darting around, searching for an escape. Grimes was closing in, his shadowed face twisted in an eerie grin as his flashlight beam trapped Jaden like a spotlight. Well, look who's here, Grimes drawled, his voice a low, taunting whisper. Couldn't resist a late-night adventure, could you? Jaden forced himself to stand tall, hiding his fear as best as he could. What are you doing here, Grimes? You don't belong here anymore. You're not supposed to be anywhere near the zoo. Grimes laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed through the empty pathways. Oh, don't you worry about that, kid. Let's just say I've got some unfinished business. Jaden swallowed hard, his mind racing. He could see now that Grimes was holding something in his other hand, a metal bar. Jaden's eyes flickered to the gorilla enclosure behind Grimes. Bosco and the other gorillas were huddled in the corner, watching the strange scene with tense curiosity. Jaden knew that if Grimes succeeded in messing with the cage locks, the gorillas, and maybe even visitors, could be in real danger. Jaden took a small, cautious step backward, his gaze darting around for anything he could use to defend himself or at least slow Grimes down. He spotted a large stick lying on the ground nearby, but he knew that grabbing it might be too obvious. Grimes took another step forward, his face contorted with anger. You and your dad think you can just push people around, don't you? Think you're better than everyone else because of your fancy little zoo. That's not true, Jaden said, his voice steadier than he felt. My dad only ever treated you with respect. You're the one who acted like a bully. Grimes' face twisted with rage, and he raised the metal bar, pointing it at Jaden. You don't know anything about me, kid. People like you, you'll never understand what it's like to work hard and get nothing in return. Jaden gritted his teeth, his anger flaring. Maybe you didn't get what you wanted because you treated people badly. My dad gave you a chance and you blew it. For a moment, Grimes looked stunned, as if no one had ever spoken to him that way. Then his face darkened, and he raised the metal bar higher. Jaden's heart pounded as he realized he had to act now. Taking a deep breath, he turned on his heel and bolted down the path, his feet pounding against the pavement. He didn't dare look back, but he could hear Grimes' footsteps thundering behind him, getting closer with every second. He ducked behind a corner, spotting a small tool shed ahead. He quickly slipped inside, pressing himself against the wall as he tried to steady his breathing. Through a crack in the door, he saw Grimes searching the area, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. Come out, you little rat! Grimes' voice echoed, filled with fury. I'll make sure you regret this. Jaden held his breath, his mind racing. He needed to get help, but if he made a run for it now, Grimes would see him. He looked around the shed, spotting a few tools, a hammer, a wrench, and some rope. He grabbed the wrench, clutching it tightly as he braced himself, his body tense and ready. Grimes' footsteps grew louder as he approached the shed, his flashlight shining through the cracks in the door. Jaden could feel his heart hammering in his chest, every second feeling like an eternity. Just as Grimes reached for the door handle, a loud, shrill alarm pierced the air. Jaden's eyes widened in relief. It was the zoo's security alarm, a signal that someone had tripped the motion sensors near the enclosures. Grimes stumbled back, startled by the sound, his face twisting with anger and panic. He cursed under his breath, glancing around as if realizing he was out of time. Jaden saw his chance. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door and bolted out of the shed, sprinting back toward the main office as fast as his legs would carry him. The alarm continued to blare, and he could see zoo staff running in his direction, their flashlights bobbing through the darkness. "Over here," Jaden shouted, waving his arms. "Grimes is messing with the cages. He's trying to break in." The staff rushed toward him, concern etched on their faces. One of the guards, a tall man named Carlos, gave Jaden a reassuring nod before turning to a group of security officers. "Split up and secure all the enclosures," Carlos ordered. "If Grimes is here, we need to make sure he doesn't get away." As the guards dispersed, Jaden felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see his father, his face pale with worry. "Jaden, are you all right?" Mr. Thompson asked, his voice filled with relief. Jaden nodded, still catching his breath. "Yeah, Dad, but Grimes was messing with Bosco's cage. He was trying to, I don't know, maybe hurt him or let him loose." Mr. Thompson's face darkened, and he wrapped an arm around Jaden, pulling him close. "I'm so proud of you, Jaden. You did the right thing. You might have saved the zoo tonight." As they headed back toward the main office, Jaden looked over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the darkness. He knew Grimes had been scared off for now, but something told him that this wasn't over. The next morning, the zoo was bustling with activity as the staff worked to repair the minor damages Grimes had caused. Jaden's dad was on the phone with the local police, filing a report about the break-in and Grimes' actions. Jaden watched from the window, feeling a mix of relief and unease. Later that day, as he was helping Miss Kim prepare the animals' meals, he noticed a group of reporters gathered at the front gates, their cameras and microphones aimed at the zoo entrance. Word of the break-in had spread, and the media was eager for details. Jaden's dad approached him, a look of determination in his eyes. "Jaden, I want you to stay here with Miss Kim. I have to talk to the reporters, but I don't want you getting mixed up in this, okay?" Jaden nodded, watching as his father walked toward the reporters, his shoulders squared and his expression calm. As his father began speaking, explaining the truth about Grimes and defending the zoo, Jaden felt a surge of pride. His dad wasn't just fighting for the zoo. He was standing up against the lies and the unfairness that had plagued them. But as the reporters jotted down notes and cameras flashed, Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that Grimes was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another chance to strike. The days that followed were filled with a strange sense of calm, though Jaden couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him. Grimes might have been scared off that night, but Jaden knew that someone as vengeful as him wouldn't disappear quietly. It felt as if a storm was brewing, and Jaden found himself watching the zoo grounds with an alertness that hadn't been there before. His father continued to deal with the fallout, giving interviews and reassuring visitors that the zoo was safe and well managed. But the whispers persisted. Rumors, fueled by Grimes' lies, continued to swirl, and Jaden could see the frustration in his father's eyes each time he returned from another exhausting meeting. One evening, Jaden and his dad were sitting together on their front porch, eating ice cream and enjoying the quiet sounds of the night. The stars sparkled above, and for a brief moment, Jaden allowed himself to relax. "Hey, Dad," he asked, breaking the silence, "do you think Grimes will ever leave us alone?" Mr. Thompson sighed, his gaze thoughtful. "People like Grimes don't let go of grudges easily. But we're not alone, Jaden. We have the support of the staff, the animals, and even the community. Grimes can spread his lies, but the truth will come out eventually." Jaden nodded, trying to believe his father's words, but deep down he couldn't help but worry. Grimes was more than just a disgruntled ex-employee. He was dangerous, and Jaden knew that he wouldn't stop until he had his revenge. The next week passed uneventfully, and for a while, it seemed as if things were finally returning to normal. Jaden resumed his daily routine, spending time with the animals and helping Ms. Kim with her duties. He felt himself beginning to relax, the memory of that terrifying night starting to fade. One afternoon, Jaden was feeding the giraffes when he noticed a man standing near the fence, watching him intently. At first, he thought it was just a curious visitor, but as he looked closer, a chill ran down his spine. The man was wearing a hat pulled low over his face and sunglasses, but there was something familiar about him. Jaden's stomach dropped as he realized who it was, Grimes. Grimes noticed Jaden staring and gave a small, smug smile before turning and disappearing into the crowd. Jaden's heart pounded as he watched him leave, the calm he'd felt over the past few days shattering instantly. He bolted toward the main office, finding his father in a meeting with Ms. Kim and some other staff members. Bursting through the door, Jaden's voice trembled as he spoke. "Dad, I saw him. Grimes, he was here, watching me." The room fell silent, and everyone turned to look at Jaden with expressions of shock and concern. "Are you sure, Jaden?" his father asked, his face pale. Jaden nodded, his hands shaking. He was wearing a hat and sunglasses, but I know it was him. Mr. Thompson exchanged a tense look with Ms. Kim. "We'll increase security. But if he's coming back onto the property, he's trespassing, and we can get the authorities involved again." But Jaden could see the worry in his father's eyes. They both knew that Grimes was sly and unpredictable. He wouldn't just walk in and start causing trouble again. He would wait, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That evening, Mr. Thompson held a meeting with the zoo staff, warning them to be on high alert and to report any suspicious activity. The security guards were given strict instructions to keep a lookout for Grimes, and extra cameras were installed near the entrances. Despite the precautions, Jaden couldn't shake his anxiety. Grimes had a way of slipping through cracks, and he feared that the former zookeeper was planning something far worse than spreading rumors. The next day, Jaden was working in the small reptile house, helping to clean the enclosures, when he heard a strange sound, a faint tapping, like someone was trying to get his attention. He turned around, scanning the dimly lit room, but there was no one there. He dismissed it as his imagination, but the tapping continued, growing louder. Jaden's heart pounded as he crept closer to the source of the sound, his eyes narrowing as he peered around the corner. There on the other side of the glass was a note taped to the inside of the enclosure. Jaden's blood ran cold as he realized someone must have slipped it in during the night. With shaking hands, he peeled the note off the glass, his eyes scanning the words scrawled in messy, hurried handwriting. "I'm coming for you, kid. You and your dad won't be able to keep me out forever." Jaden's breath hitched as he read the words over and over. He wanted to crumple the note, to throw it away and pretend it didn't exist, but he knew he had to show his father. Grimes was here, and he wasn't just targeting the zoo anymore. He was targeting him and his dad directly. Clutching the note tightly, Jaden sprinted toward his father's office, the words echoing in his mind like a sinister promise. When he reached the office, he found his dad speaking with a few members of the security team. Jaden held out the note, his face pale and his hand trembling. "Dad, I found this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Mr. Thompson's expression hardened as he took the note, reading the words carefully. His face grew tense, his jaw clenching as he crumpled the paper in his hand. "All right," he said, his voice steady but filled with a determination Jaden hadn't seen before. "This has gone on long enough. We're calling the police." Within an hour, 2 officers arrived at the zoo, taking statements from Jaden, his father, and the security team. They promised to investigate the situation, but Jaden could sense their skepticism. Without any concrete evidence, it was just a note, an empty threat. The officers left, and as the sun set over the zoo, a heavy silence fell. Jaden and his dad sat together in his office, both lost in thought. "Jaden," Mr. Thompson said after a long pause, his voice soft, "I want you to stay close to me for a while. If you feel uncomfortable or see anything strange, come to me immediately." Jaden nodded, his mind filled with images of Grimes lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce. He knew that his dad was trying to protect him, but the fear was still there, gnawing at him like a restless animal. That night, as Jaden lay in bed, sleep refused to come. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind outside, made him jump, his imagination painting shadows of Grimes in every corner. He tossed and turned, the weight of the threat pressing down on him. Finally, around midnight, he heard a faint noise, a shuffling like someone was moving around outside his window. His heart pounding, Jaden crept out of bed, inching toward the window to peer outside. What he saw made his blood run cold. There at the edge of the yard stood Grimes, half hidden in the shadows. His face was twisted in a menacing grin, his eyes locked onto Jaden's window. Before Jaden could react, Grimes raised a finger to his lips in a silent shh gesture, then turned and disappeared into the night. Jaden stumbled back from the window, his heart racing, his mind reeling with terror. He knew he had to tell his dad, but as he opened his mouth to call out, he found that no words would come. And as the darkness closed in around him, Jaden realized that Grimes' threat was far from empty. and that their battle with the twisted Zookeeper had only just begun. The next morning, Jaden woke up feeling exhausted, his sleep broken by nightmares of Grimes lurking in every shadow. He hadn't told his father about seeing Grimes in the yard. He didn't want to worry him more than he already was, but as he got ready for the day, the fear gnawed at him. Grimes was getting bolder, and Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that he was planning something big. As Jaden headed out to the zoo with his dad, he noticed extra security guards patrolling the grounds. His father had taken the threats seriously and had hired more people to keep an eye on things. Jaden felt a bit safer, but he also knew that Grimes was clever. He'd find a way to slip past them if he really wanted to. By noon, the zoo was bustling with families and school groups. Jaden tried to focus on his usual tasks, helping Ms. Kim feed the animals and answering visitors' questions, but he kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting Grimes to appear out of nowhere. While he was helping clean the chimpanzee enclosure, Jaden spotted a boy his age, staring curiously at the animals. Jaden smiled and walked over to him. "Hey, you like the chimps?" Jaden asked, trying to distract himself. The boy nodded, his eyes wide with excitement. "Yeah. Do they know any tricks?" "Some of them do," Jaden replied. "Charlie over there likes to play hide and seek with us, and Lulu loves giving high fives." The boy grinned, pressing his face closer to the glass. For a moment, Jaden's worries faded as he explained more about the chimps and their personalities. But then he noticed something odd. Across the zoo, near the reptile house, a figure was standing by the fence, watching him. The man wore a hat and dark glasses, and Jaden's stomach twisted as he recognized the unmistakable figure. Grimes. Jaden's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to tell someone, to shout for help, but he didn't want to scare the kids around him. Instead, he slowly backed away, his mind racing. Grimes caught his eye, giving him a cold smile before vanishing into the crowd. Jaden's heart pounded as he ran toward his father's office, slipping through the back door and slamming it shut behind him. "Dad," he called, his voice breathless. "Grimes, he's here again. I saw him watching me by the reptile house." Mr. Thompson's face turned pale, and he quickly picked up the phone, dialing the zoo's security team. "Keep a lookout for Grimes," he instructed, his tone urgent. "He's somewhere near the reptile house. I don't want him getting close to the animals, or my son." As the security team dispersed, Jaden and his father exchanged a worried glance. This time, it wasn't just a passing sighting. Grimes was here with a purpose, and Jaden could feel the danger closing in. That afternoon, the zoo staff gathered for a tense meeting in the break room. Everyone was on edge, whispering about Grimes and his strange behavior. Mr. Thompson addressed them, his voice calm but serious. "I know we're all concerned about Grimes, but we have to remain vigilant," he said. "Our priority is the safety of the animals, our visitors, and each other. If anyone sees anything unusual, report it immediately." Jaden listened, trying to stay brave, but he couldn't shake the image of Grimes watching him with that cold, twisted smile. After the meeting, he returned to his tasks, feeling a bit more reassured with the extra security around. But deep down, he knew Grimes wouldn't be stopped by guards or cameras. He was like a shadow, lurking just out of reach, waiting for the right moment to strike. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the zoo as the last visitors trickled out. Jaden was helping Ms. Kim lock up the petting zoo area when he heard a faint clinking sound coming from the nearby aviary. "Did you hear that?" Jaden asked, glancing at Ms. Kim. She frowned, looking around. "It's probably just one of the parrots. They're always knocking things around." But as Jaden moved closer to the aviary, he noticed something strange. One of the locks on the gate was hanging open, the metal chain swaying in the breeze. Jaden's heart skipped a beat as he realized that someone had tampered with it. "Ms. Kim," he whispered, his voice tense. "The gate's unlocked. Someone's been here." Ms. Kim's eyes widened. "We need to tell your father. Now." They quickly hurried to the main office, where Mr. Thompson was speaking with the head of security. Jaden explained what he'd seen, his voice shaking with fear and anger. "Grimes was here," he said, his fists clenched. "I know it was him. He's trying to mess with the animals. He's trying to scare us." Mr. Thompson placed a comforting hand on Jaden's shoulder, his expression grim. "We'll get to the bottom of this, son. He won't get away with it." But just as he spoke, a loud, piercing alarm blared through the zoo, echoing across the empty grounds. Jaden's heart sank. That was the emergency alarm for the gorilla enclosure. Something was wrong, something terrible. Without thinking, Jaden bolted toward the enclosure, his father and Ms. Kim close behind him. As they reached the gorilla area, they saw the heavy gate hanging open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Inside the enclosure, Bosco and the other gorillas were agitated, pacing and grunting nervously. And there in the middle of the enclosure was Grimes, a smug look on his face as he waved mockingly at Jaden and his father. "You think you can keep me out?" Grimes sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "This zoo used to be my life, and I won't let you take it away." Jaden felt a surge of anger and fear, his fists clenched as he glared at Grimes. "You don't belong here, Grimes. You lost that right a long time ago." Grimes laughed, a twisted mocking sound that sent chills down Jaden's spine. "You're just a kid. You and your dad think you're so high and mighty, but you don't understand what it's like to lose everything." Before anyone could react, Grimes turned and darted deeper into the enclosure, disappearing into the dense trees and rocks that filled the gorilla's habitat. "Dad, we have to stop him," Jaden cried, fear gripping his heart. "He's going to hurt the gorillas." Mr. Thompson nodded, his face tense with determination. "Stay here with Miss Kim. I'll go after him." But Jaden couldn't just stand by and watch. As his father hurried into the enclosure, Jaden took a deep breath, steeling himself. He knew it was dangerous, but he couldn't let Grimes get away with this. Ignoring Miss Kim's protests, he slipped past the gate and followed his father into the enclosure, his heart racing as he ventured into the unfamiliar terrain. The sounds of the gorillas filled the air, their nervous grunts and calls echoing around him. Ahead, he could see his father's figure moving cautiously through the trees, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of Grimes. Jaden crept closer, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Suddenly, a loud crash rang out, followed by a furious roar. Jaden's heart pounded as he saw Grimes up ahead, cornered by Bosco, the largest and most powerful gorilla in the enclosure. Bosco was clearly agitated, his muscles tense as he glared at Grimes, his deep growl reverberating through the air. Grimes' face twisted with fear as he realized he was trapped. He took a shaky step back, his eyes darting around as he searched for an escape. But there was nowhere to go. Jaden's father stepped forward, his voice firm but calm. "Grimes, you need to leave. Now? You've done enough damage." But Grimes shook his head, a look of desperation in his eyes. "No, this zoo was mine. I won't let you take it from me." In a split-second decision, Grimes lunged toward Bosco, his movements wild and unpredictable. Bosco reacted instantly, letting out a powerful roar as he swung his massive arm, knocking Grimes off balance. Jaden watched in horror as Grimes stumbled, his face twisted in rage and fear, and then, as if in slow motion, he saw Grimes reach out, grabbing onto the branches of a nearby tree, trying to pull himself up. But Bosco was faster. With a swift, decisive movement, Bosco reached down, grabbing Grimes by the arm. Grimes let out a terrified scream, his struggles growing weaker as Bosco held him firmly, his strength undeniable. Jaden felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with fear. For the first time, Grimes was facing the consequences of his actions, his arrogance and hatred brought down by the very animals he'd tried to harm. Just as Jaden thought it was over, Grimes managed to twist free, stumbling back with a look of pure hatred in his eyes. But in his desperation, he hadn't noticed the steep drop behind him. Jaden's eyes widened as he watched Grimes lose his footing, his face contorted in horror as he fell backward, disappearing into the thick foliage below. A tense silence filled the air as Jaden, his father, and Bosco all stood frozen, staring at the spot where Grimes had vanished. Jaden's heart pounded as he realized they'd just witnessed the end of Grimes' twisted revenge. But the silence didn't last long. A faint rustling from below signaled that Grimes was still alive, and that he wasn't done yet. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Jaden, his father, and Bosco stood rooted to the spot, eyes fixed on the dense foliage below where Grimes had fallen. Just as Jaden began to hope they'd seen the last of him, a faint, pained groan drifted up from the shadows. Mr. Thompson clenched his fists, his gaze hardening. "Stay here, Jaden," he instructed firmly, turning toward the path that led to the bottom of the gorilla enclosure. Jaden knew he should listen, but fear and curiosity kept him from moving. Against his better judgment, he followed his father, making sure to stay far enough behind to avoid being seen. As they descended the winding path, the sounds of rustling leaves and distant animal calls filled the air, mingling with Grimes' groans. Jaden's heart raced, his pulse loud in his ears. He didn't know what they'd find at the bottom, but he knew that whatever happened next would change everything. When they reached the clearing below, Jaden's breath caught. Grimes lay sprawled on the ground, clutching his leg, his face twisted in pain and rage. He tried to sit up as they approached, but his injury forced him back down, his teeth clenched in frustration. Mr. Thompson stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "Grimes, this has to stop. You're hurting yourself, and worse, you're endangering others. You're trespassing on zoo grounds, and I've already called the police. They're on their way." Grimes sneered, his face contorting with bitterness. "You think you've won, don't you?" He spat, his voice dripping with malice. "You took everything from me, and now you're playing the hero. But I know the truth, and so will everyone else." Mr. Thompson's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "You did this to yourself, Grimes. I didn't take anything from you. You lost your position because of your own choices, and you know that." Grimes' gaze flickered with a dangerous intensity, and Jaden's skin prickled. He could tell that Grimes was desperate, clinging to his hatred like a lifeline. But as his father spoke, something inside Jaden shifted. For the first time, he saw Grimes not as an unstoppable monster, but as a broken man consumed by bitterness and anger. But Grimes wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You think you can keep me out, but I know every corner of this place. I know things about this zoo you couldn't even imagine. You won't be rid of me that easily." Jaden's heart pounded as he listened, a creeping sense of dread settling over him. He had no idea what Grimes was planning, but he knew that the man wouldn't stop until he had his revenge. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed through the trees, and Jaden turned to see two police officers approaching. Mr. Thompson stepped aside, allowing them to take over. One of the officers knelt beside Grimes, checking his injuries, while the other spoke with Mr. Thompson, taking down details of the incident. Grimes glared at Jaden as they lifted him to his feet, his face twisted with fury. "This isn't over, kid," he snarled, his voice low but filled with venom. "You and your dad haven't seen the last of me." Jaden swallowed hard, his gaze steady. He didn't flinch, even as Grimes was led away, his threats lingering in the air like a dark cloud. As the police car drove off, Mr. Thompson placed a reassuring hand on Jaden's shoulder. "It's over now, Jaden," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Grimes won't be able to come back here. We'll make sure of it." Jaden nodded, trying to believe his father's words, but deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that Grimes' threats were more than just empty words. He knew the man was dangerous, and he couldn't ignore the sense of foreboding that settled over him. That night, Jaden lay awake in bed, his mind replaying the events of the day. Grimes' words echoed in his thoughts, a reminder of the man's twisted obsession. Jaden knew he should feel relieved that Grimes was gone, but he couldn't shake the fear that their troubles were far from over. As he drifted off to sleep, a single unsettling thought lingered in his mind. What if Grimes found a way back? The next day, life at the zoo seemed to return to normal, though an uneasy tension hung in the air. The staff went about their duties with a sense of cautious relief, and Jaden did his best to focus on his tasks, trying to push Grimes' threats out of his mind. But as he moved through the familiar paths and enclosures, he couldn't help but feel that something was different. He kept a close eye on the animals, half expecting Grimes to have left some hidden trap or sabotage behind. The zoo felt like a puzzle, each familiar corner now tainted by a lingering sense of dread. Later that afternoon, Jaden was helping Ms. Kim with the afternoon feeding rounds when he noticed something strange. One of the food storage sheds was slightly ajar, the lock dangling loosely. Jaden's heart skipped a beat as he stepped closer, peering inside. The room was empty, save for a single sheet of paper lying on the floor. Frowning, Jaden picked it up, his breath catching as he read the words scrawled in familiar, messy handwriting. "You may have won the battle, but the war is far from over." Jaden's hands shook as he crumpled the note, his mind racing. Grimes was gone, but his presence lingered like a shadow that refused to disappear. Jaden's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the note. Grimes' threat hung over him like a storm cloud, heavy and foreboding. He knew he had to tell his father, but a feeling of dread stopped him. What if this was just the beginning? What if Grimes was still plotting something worse? "Jaden, are you okay?" Miss Kim asked, noticing the look of panic on his face. He forced a smile, trying to push his fears aside. Yet just a little startled by how messy it is in here. He quickly folded the note and tucked it into his pocket, deciding to keep it to himself for now. If Grimes had a plan, he needed to find out more before alerting everyone. The afternoon passed in a blur, with Jaden pretending to be focused on his tasks while the note burned a hole in his pocket. He was determined to uncover what Grimes was up to, but he also knew he had to be careful. He didn't want to alert anyone else, especially with the added security. The last thing he wanted was for them to treat him like a scared kid who couldn't handle himself. That evening, after the zoo had closed and the last visitors had left, Jaden found a quiet corner in the office to think. He uncrumpled the note and reread the message, his mind racing with possibilities. What kind of war was Grimes talking about? Just then, the office door creaked open, and Mr. Thompson walked in, looking tired but relieved. "Jaden, I want to talk to you." "How are you holding up?" he asked, taking a seat across from him. Jaden hesitated, glancing at the note in his hand. Should he tell his dad everything? Would it make things worse? But then again, he couldn't keep this secret forever. If Grimes had a plan, they needed to be prepared. "Dad, I found something," Jaden said slowly, unfolding the note. He held it out, watching his father's face as he read the words. Mr. Thompson's expression hardened, the calmness draining from his face. "Where'd you find this?" he asked sharply. "In the food storage shed. The lock was loose, and I think Grimes might have been there. He's not just gone, Dad. He's still around, and he's planning something." Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I should have known he wouldn't give up so easily. I thought we had more time." He looked directly at Jaden, his eyes serious. "We need to take this seriously, son. Grimes is unpredictable, and we can't afford to underestimate him." Jaden nodded, feeling a weight settle on his shoulders. He had always looked up to his father as a protector, but now he felt a surge of responsibility himself. "What should we do? How can we stop him?" "We need to increase security even more," Mr. Thompson replied. "I'll get in touch with the police and let them know about the note. They'll be able to help us monitor the zoo more closely." As they spoke, Jaden felt a mixture of fear and determination. This was more than just Grimes trying to mess with their lives. It was about protecting the zoo and everyone in it. He had to do his part. The following days were tense. Mr. Thompson arranged for more guards to patrol the zoo, and Jaden tried to keep a low profile while still assisting with his chores. But he could feel the atmosphere change. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, and every rustle made him jump. One afternoon, while helping with the feeding of the lions, Jaden noticed a group of people gathered near the entrance. They were shouting, and the sound echoed across the zoo. He could see his father speaking urgently to the police officers near the entrance, their faces grim. "What's happening?" Jaden asked a nearby keeper, who shook her head, her expression tight with worry. "Somebody broke into the gift shop and vandalized it. They think it's connected to Grimes," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously. Jaden's heart sank. Grimes was getting bolder. He felt a surge of anger. They needed to put an end to this. As the crowd dispersed, Jaden walked over to his father. "Dad, what did they say?" he had asked, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. Mr. Thompson looked down, his expression grave. They found some graffiti inside the gift shop that includes some of Grimes' old slogans. "It's not just vandalism, it's a message. He's trying to show that he's still here, still fighting." "What does that mean for us?" Jaden asked, struggling to keep his fear at bay. "It means we need to be on high alert. Grimes is trying to send a message that he's not done with us," his father replied, running a hand through his hair. "We can't let our guard down." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the zoo, Jaden felt a sense of urgency wash over him. He couldn't let Grimes win. He had to find a way to stop him before it was too late. That night, as Jaden lay in bed, his mind raced with thoughts of Grimes and his threats. He couldn't sleep, tossing and turning as images of Grimes' twisted grin danced in his mind. He knew he had to do something, anything, to protect his father and the zoo. Suddenly an idea sparked in his mind. What if he could find evidence of Grimes' next move? If he could track him down before he acted, maybe he could warn his father and the police. He sat up, determination coursing through him. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. The next day, Jaden decided to sneak out to explore the areas of the zoo that were off limits to visitors. He figured if Grimes was around, he might leave clues about his plans in those places. With a deep breath, he waited until the zoo was quiet after lunch before slipping out of the office. As he crept through the shadows, he felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The quiet corners of the zoo held secrets, and he was determined to uncover them. He started at the old maintenance shed, a place he had always been curious about. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing dusty shelves and tools long forgotten. Sunlight filtered in through the dirty windows, casting eerie shapes on the walls. As he rummaged through the clutter, Jaden heard a sound outside, a familiar rustling that made his heart race. Someone was there. He held his breath, straining to listen. Just then, he saw a shadow pass by the door. Panic surged through him as he ducked behind a stack of old crates, heart pounding in his chest. Who could it be? Was it Grimes? The shadow paused and Jaden could hear low voices. They were whispering, too low for him to understand. He peeked out from his hiding place, his eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, the door swung open, and two figures stepped inside. Jaden's breath caught as he recognized one of them. It was Grimes, his face dark and twisted with anger. The other figure was someone Jaden didn't recognize, a tall man with a hooded jacket. "I told you to wait for me," Grimes snapped, glaring at the stranger. "This isn't a game. We need to get rid of them once and for all." Jaden's heart raced as he strained to hear more, his body tense with fear. Grimes was planning something serious. He had to warn his father. Just as he was about to move, Grimes turned sharply, his eyes locking onto Jaden's hiding place. "I know you're here, kid," he shouted, a sinister grin spreading across his face. "You can't hide from me." Adrenaline surged through Jaden, and he bolted toward the door, knowing he had only seconds to escape. But as he reached for the handle, the stranger grabbed him from behind, yanking him back into the shed. "Gotcha," the man hissed, his grip like iron. Jaden struggled, panic flooding his senses. "Let me go," he shouted, but the man's grip tightened, and he felt himself being pulled deeper into the shadows. Just then, he heard Grimes' voice again, low and menacing. "Bring him to me. I want him to see what happens when you mess with me." Jaden's heart raced as fear gripped him. This was it. He was trapped, and he had no idea what Grimes was planning next. Jaden's pulse raced as the stranger dragged him deeper into the dimly lit maintenance shed. The smell of rust and oil hung in the air, mixing with the scent of old wood. Panic clawed at him, but he couldn't let fear take over. He needed to think and find a way to escape. "Let me go," he shouted again, his voice echoing off the walls. He twisted in the man's grip, desperately trying to break free. But the stranger held him tightly, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "Grimes wants to have a little chat with you," the man said, his tone dripping with malice. "Don't worry, it'll be fun." Jaden's mind raced, weighing his options. He glanced around the shed, looking for something, anything, that could help him escape. His eyes landed on a small rusty wrench lying on the ground near a workbench. If he could just get to it. Suddenly the door creaked open again, and Grimes stepped inside, his face twisted with a mixture of anger and amusement. Well, what do we have here?" he said, looking at Jaden with a smug smile. "Caught you playing hide and seek, huh?" Jaden's heart sank as Grimes stepped closer, his gaze sharp and calculating. "You really shouldn't have meddled in my affairs, kid. You've made this personal." "Why are you doing this?" Jaden shot back, trying to sound brave even as fear gripped him. "What do you want?" Grimes laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the shed. "What do I want? I want you to understand what it means to cross me. I want your father to see that I'm not someone you can just push aside." Jaden's mind raced. Grimes was unstable, and there was no telling what he might do next. He had to find a way to escape and warn his father. "You're sick, Grimes. You think this is going to make you feel better? You'll just end up in jail again." "Oh, you think I care about that?" Grimes sneered, stepping closer until Jaden could see the rage simmering behind his eyes. "This isn't about jail, it's about power, and right now, I have all the power." The stranger tightened his grip on Jaden, and for a moment, Jaden felt hopeless. But then he remembered the wrench. He had to get to it. In a sudden burst of determination, Jaden wrenched himself free, surprising the man holding him. He stumbled backward, darting toward the workbench. Grimes lunged at him, but Jaden was quicker. He grabbed the wrench just as Grimes reached for him. With all his strength, Jaden swung it in Grimes' direction. "Stay back," he shouted, adrenaline pumping through him. The wrench clanged against a metal shelf, and Grimes froze, his eyes wide with surprise. "Kid, you don't want to do this," Grimes warned, his voice low and threatening. But Jaden felt empowered. He wasn't going to let fear control him any longer. "Get away from me," Jaden yelled, brandishing the wrench like a sword. "I'll call for help." Grimes laughed again, but this time it was laced with desperation. "You think anyone can save you? You're alone in here." "I'm not alone," Jaden shot back, glancing toward the door. He had to find a way out, and he needed to act fast. "My dad will be looking for me." As if on cue, a loud crash echoed from outside the shed. Jaden's heart leaped in his chest as he realized his father was trying to break in. "Dad," he shouted, hope flooding through him. "I'm in here." Grimes' expression twisted into rage. "No, you can't let him in here." He lunged at Jaden, but Jaden was ready. He swung the wrench again, narrowly missing Grimes as he dodged to the side. "Let him go, Grimes," Mr. Thompson shouted from outside, his voice filled with authority. "I know you're in there. You're surrounded." The noise outside intensified as the police officers and zoo staff began to converge on the shed. Jaden could hear their voices, their commands growing louder. Grimes realized the walls were closing in, and fear flickered across his face for the first time. "Kid, you don't know what you're doing," Grimes hissed, backing away slightly. "This isn't over. I won't forget this." "Neither will I," Jaden said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He knew he had the upper hand. He just had to hold on a little longer until help arrived. With a sudden burst of courage, Jaden dashed for the door, wrench raised. "Let me out," he shouted, slamming into the door just as it was kicked open by his father and two police officers. They stormed inside, their eyes scanning the room. "Jaden!" Mr. Thompson yelled, relief flooding his features. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Jaden exclaimed, glancing at Grimes, who was now cornered against the wall. The stranger was backing away, fear now evident in his eyes. "Get away from him," one of the officers ordered, stepping between Grimes and Jaden. "You're under arrest." Grimes' face twisted with fury, but he didn't resist as the officers moved in to cuff him. "This isn't over," he screamed as they let him out. "You'll regret this, kid." Jaden felt a wave of triumph wash over him as he watched Grimes being escorted away. He had faced his fears and stood up to the man who had terrorized him and his family. "Are you sure you're okay?" Mr. Thompson asked, kneeling beside Jaden and looking into his eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine," Jaden replied, feeling a rush of gratitude for his father's presence. "I wasn't going to let him win." Mr. Thompson pulled him into a tight hug, relief evident in his embrace. "I'm so proud of you, Jaden. You were incredibly brave. But let's make sure we never let it get this far again." As they stepped outside into the fading light, Jaden felt a sense of hope. They had faced Grimes together, and though the road ahead would be challenging, he knew they could overcome anything as a family. But deep down, a lingering thought nagged at him. Grimes had threatened him before, and he knew he couldn't let his guard down entirely. The fight wasn't just about overcoming Grimes. It was about standing strong against the darkness that sometimes crept into their lives. Jaden realized that he had a voice and power he never knew he had, and he was determined to use it for good. As they walked back toward the main zoo entrance, Jaden took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day slowly lift. The sun set in vibrant colors, casting a golden glow over the zoo, a reminder of the beauty that still existed in the world. But as he glanced back, one last time at the maintenance shed, a chill ran down his spine. He had a feeling that Grimes' threats wouldn't be the last they would hear. And so, with the shadows of the past lurking, Jaden prepared for whatever might come next. He was ready to face the challenges ahead, standing strong alongside his father, knowing that together they could conquer any darkness. In the weeks that followed the confrontation with Grimes, life at the zoo slowly began to return to normal. The police had taken Grimes into custody, and his accomplice was also arrested. It turned out that Grimes had been involved in a larger scheme, one that aimed to sabotage the zoo and its reputation. The evidence gathered during their investigation revealed his plans to manipulate the media and cause panic, all to gain control over the zoo's management. Mr. Thompson worked closely with the authorities to ensure that Grimes faced serious charges. News of Grimes' arrest spread throughout the community, and many were relieved to know that the man who had caused so much chaos was finally behind bars. Jaden watched as his father stood firm during the media frenzy, confidently addressing the public about the zoo's commitment to safety and the care of the animals. "Grimes thought he could break us," Mr. Thompson said during one of his press conferences. "But we are stronger than that. This zoo is a family, and we will always stand together against those who threaten us." Jaden beamed with pride as he watched his father speak. He knew that Mr. Thompson had always been a protector, but now he saw the strength and resilience that came from leading their community. It was a lesson that Jaden would carry with him for the rest of his life. As time passed, the zoo implemented new security measures, ensuring that the animals and visitors were safe. The community rallied around the zoo, hosting fundraisers and events to support its operations. Families came to visit, enjoying the exhibits and learning about the animals. Jaden was now a familiar face at the zoo, often seen helping out with the younger visitors and sharing his passion for wildlife. One sunny afternoon, as Jaden was cleaning up near the gorilla enclosure, he noticed a group of kids gathered nearby. They were fascinated by the gentle giants, their eyes wide with wonder. Jaden felt a warm sense of belonging wash over him as he approached them. "Did you know that gorillas are really smart?" he said, smiling at the kids. "They can even learn sign language." The children gasped in excitement, asking him questions about the gorillas and other animals in the zoo. Jaden loved sharing what he had learned and watching their faces light up with curiosity. It felt amazing to inspire others and show them the beauty of nature. "Hey Jaden," Miss Kim called, waving from a distance. "We need your help with the new exhibit. Come on." As he joined her, Jaden felt a thrill of adventure. The zoo was always evolving, and he was a part of its journey. It wasn't just a place of business. It was a home, a sanctuary for animals, and a haven for the community. One evening, as Jaden sat with his father on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Mr. Thompson turned to him. "You know, I've been thinking about the future of the zoo," he said thoughtfully. "I want you to be a part of it. What do you think about joining the management team when you're older?" Jaden's eyes widened in surprise and excitement. "Really? You mean it?" "Absolutely," Mr. Thompson replied, smiling. "You've shown so much courage and passion for what we do. I believe you'll make a great leader one day." Jaden felt a swell of pride. The thought of helping to run the zoo and protect the animals he loved so much filled him with hope. He had faced his fears and fought against the darkness, and now he saw a bright future ahead. Meanwhile, Grimes was sentenced to several years in prison for his crimes. The judge emphasized the danger he posed not only to the zoo, but to the community as a whole. Grimes' actions had consequences, and he would have to reckon with them behind bars. As news of his sentencing spread, the community celebrated the zoo's victory over the chaos that Grimes had tried to sow. It was a moment of triumph, a reminder that courage and determination could overcome adversity. One sunny Saturday, the zoo held a special event to celebrate the community's support and resilience. There were games, food stalls, and educational booths, all designed to bring families together and raise awareness about wildlife conservation. As Jaden helped set up the booths, he spotted his friends among the crowd, their faces bright with excitement. He ran over to join them, eager to share the joy of the day. "Are you guys ready for the scavenger hunt?" one of his friends asked, bouncing on her heels. "Definitely. Let's go," Jaden replied, a smile stretching across his face. Together, they dashed off to find clues hidden throughout the zoo, laughing and cheering as they discovered new facts about the animals. As the day wound down, Jaden stood with his father at the entrance, watching families leave with smiles and laughter. The zoo was alive with energy, and Jaden felt a deep sense of belonging and purpose. "Thank you for believing in me, Dad," Jaden said, leaning against his father. "I promise I'll do my best to help the zoo and protect the animals." Mr. Thompson wrapped an arm around him, pride shining in his eyes. "I know you will, son. We're in this together, and I couldn't ask for a better partner." As they watched the sun dip below the horizon, Jaden realized that the battle against Grimes had taught him valuable lessons about bravery, unity, and the importance of standing up for what is right. And as he looked toward the future, he felt hopeful, knowing that together with his father and the community, they could face any challenge that came their way. With the shadows of the past behind them, a new dawn awaited, a future bright with promise, love, and adventure at the zoo they cherished.